Many people don't know this, but when I started doing my writing on oil, it was in the 80s. I had it was what you would call an internship, but I was working with the ambassador of Australia, who owned Sunset Magazine and Lane Publishing, and I was working with some of his assistants, and they sent me to Greece, Athens, Cairo, Egypt, Luxor. I went through the Nile. Anyway, they sent me on these excursions to go interview the Kuwaitis. It was during the first Persian Gulf War. I was in Egypt, riding along the Nile, actually, when the first missiles were being shot, and I was on my way through areas of Aswan and Luxor, and I was interviewing a lot of the oil executives from Kuwait that were waiting out the war in Egypt, and some were in Athens, Greece, and I went to Mycenae and Mykonos and some different areas with these people in Delphi. And so I write about it now in a lot of my articles, and I've found a lot of the pictures and audio interviews. At that time I was using a cassette player to do my audio interviews, and that's when I realized at a very young age how significant oil production, the petroleum industry and oil industry, how important it was that it led the United States to intervene in a war in Kuwait, which a lot of Americans didn't even know where to find Kuwait on a map at the time. This isn't critical of Americans at all. People around the world had a hard time understanding where Kuwait fit in the world stage and how the oil industry affected the United States even after what happened with problems that America had with oil and gas during the Jimmy Carter administration, when I remember how my father and mother went out in Sonoma County, California one Sunday, and my father couldn't get gas because they had odd and even days for getting gas. If your license plate ended with an even number, then you could only get gas on a day that ended in an even number, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. If your car had a license plate with an odd number, then you could only get gas on odd days. And my mother was pregnant, and we had problems in the car, and nobody would give us gas. It didn't matter whether there was a pregnant mother in the car or a father that was suffering from lung cancer and mesothelioma. They would not give you gas if you did not have a license to coincide with certain days. So I remember my family panicking and barely getting home on fumes. So I was very affected by that, and then when I started learning about what the oil executives went through in different countries, I started reading and studying more about oil. The other odd thing was when I came back from areas that were deemed dangerous by my family, like Egypt and Cairo, where everybody was wonderful. I was even shocked when Mubarak fell from grace, because when I was in Egypt, everybody seemed to love Mubarak. And even his name, when translated from the Arabic, means blessed one. When I went to Egypt, everybody was wonderful and friendly and just beloved. They took me to the pyramids on a camel, and I got to see the world and ride along the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens and go to Memphis to see a lot of the archaeology. But when this stuff was taking place, I remember that I came back to San Francisco, California, and there were huge fights in the streets, and I was on Market Street, and there were protests, and people were throwing glass bottles that were in the air, and the heavy bottles were falling on people's skulls and fracturing them, and then there were people throwing things through glass windows at the grocery stores along Market Street, and it was complete chaos. And here we were supposed to be a protected, friendly, liberal city, San Francisco, California, where I was going to college, but people were warning me about the dangers of being in Egypt, where everybody was incredibly neighborly and strong element of community. I saw tens of thousands of people attend one wedding when I was in Aswan, and everybody was friendly and throwing the groom up on their shoulders and celebrating. But back in San Francisco, California, there were fights, and I remember one of the politicians was at a hotel on Union Square, and the police had to block it off, and people were throwing food at him, and one woman was running so fast, and she was in her 60s, that her heel broke and she fell, and nobody would help her because she was attending one of these political functions. So sometimes when people have this view of the Middle East being unfriendly, it's a very misinterpreted view. You gotta understand oil with an open mind, and you can't demonize people or say that people are wrong and bad. For example, Dick Cheney. I hear so many opinions on him, and he's on the cover of this book, but do we have cheap oil and gas prices here? Is energy important in the United States? Do the companies that he represents help us to gain more energy in the United States? We want the energy. We want the cars and the gas. And you have to understand and keep an open mind, and we have to look at technology, and we have to see how we can be objective and not just hate, but be objective. And that's important when it comes to understanding a commodity with services and products and supplies and demands that as important as petroleum oil.